Tonight, if the temperature drops, you turn a dial. Or tap an app. The heat comes on. You pull a blanket up and fall asleep without thinking about it. Now take that away. No thermostat, no insulation in the walls, no gas line under the street, no warehouse 2 states away ready to ship you more blankets. Just you, a timber structure full of gaps, a fire that demands constant feeding, in a winter that does not care whether you're ready. That was every winter, for every person, for most of human history in the northern world. And people survived. Not just survived, they built systems so precisely adapted to the cold that some are only now being rediscovered by researchers. Here is how, and here is how much of it, without a single thermometer, actually worked. Start with the one thing medieval people understood that you've completely forgotten. Winter wasn't a problem you solved in the moment, it was a project that began in summer. The moment the harvest came in, the question changed entirely. Not what to grow, what to keep, how to keep it, whether it would be enough. Salt was one of the most valuable commodities in the medieval world, not for flavor, but because salt was the line between a household and starvation. Pork was salted and hung, fish were dried, vegetables were fermented, grain was guarded against rot and rats with an intensity that bordered on obsession. The largest noble households tracked dozens of varieties of preserved food, rotated by age, watched like inventory. For peasants, the scale was smaller, the stakes were higher. A spoiled grain store didn't mean an inconvenient season, it meant spring hunger. Sometimes it meant death. And then there were the animals. Most families couldn't feed their full herd through a northern winter, so in late autumn they killed most of it. Only the breeding stock survived, kept alive through the cold months, often inside the cottage itself, sharing body heat with the family. A cow generates real warmth. Peasants didn't need a thermometer to know it. They just noticed the end of the cottage with the animals was warmer than the end without them. But food was only half the equation. The cold itself had to be managed hour by hour for months. Stone, surprisingly, was the enemy. A stone castle in deep winter didn't trap heat, it radiated cold inward around the clock. Timber-framed cottages did better, but the gaps were everywhere. Wind found its way through all of it. So the fire became everything. Not a fireplace behind glass, a fire burning more or less continuously from October to April, central to the entire household. Letting it die overnight wasn't an inconvenience, it was dangerous. Banking it before sleep, burying the embers in ash so they'd survive until morning wasn't a quaint custom, it was engineering, practiced daily by people who understood exactly what would happen if they got it wrong. Life itself rearranged around that fire. People slept closer to it, worked closer to it. The household contracted into the warmest room and stayed there for months. Then came clothing, and medieval winter clothing was far more sophisticated than you'd guess. Wool retains heat even soaked through, a property almost no synthetic material matches. Peasants layered it, treated the outer shell with lanolin for water resistance. The wealthy wore fur, not decoration, but serious cold weather technology, the medieval equivalent of a down jacket, expensive enough to be passed down for generations. And then there's the practice that genuinely surprises modern people. Medieval peasants hibernated, not literally, but close. The historical record shows a real measurable drop in activity and food intake during the coldest months. People simply stopped moving unless they had to. They slept longer, ate less, spent entire days under every scrap of fabric they owned, conserving heat the way a hibernating animal conserves it by demanding less of it. This wasn't laziness, it was the body doing exactly what bodies do when food and warmth run thin, shutting down anything not essential to survival. They didn't have a word for metabolic conservation, they just called it staying in bed. The result was identical.
But winter wasn't only a physical fight. And this is where the story stops matching what you'd expect. Medieval communities didn't experience winter as a season of suffering to endure alone. They built an entire culture designed to get through it together. The feast days crowding the medieval calendar weren't scattered randomly. They clustered in winter on purpose. Christmas and its 12 days of celebration, Epiphany, Candlemas in February. Each one landed exactly when communities most needed a reason to gather, a reason for extra food, a reason to remind themselves they'd make it. The midwinter feast wasn't indulgence, it was infrastructure. These celebrations lined up with the point of maximum food stores and maximum social strain, early winter, before the long drawdown began. The feast was proof, eaten and witnessed together, that the household had prepared, that it would survive. And survival was never private. You shared the fire, you shared the food, you shared the work of keeping flames alive through the night and digging paths to animals that would die without tending. The sealed-off, single-family privacy that modern people treat as comfortable simply wasn't available to them. If it had been, it would have killed them. The cold pushed people into the same room. The long nights gave them hours with nothing to do but talk, teach, plan, remember. The smaller, darker, slower world of medieval winter turned out to be the world where the most durable things got built. Alliances, skills passed hand to hand by firelight, the kind of closeness that doesn't survive in a house where everyone has their own room in their own screen. You turn up the heat, and the season disappears. You've solved the problem your ancestors spent every autumn bracing for. You solved it so completely that you now spend January alone in a warm room wondering why it feels so empty. They were cold. They were hungry. They were never, not once, alone.